Hello, peace-loving, over-the-peak people. We're going to go to UC Davis via the Atlantic in an article by James Fallows entitled Pepper Spray Brutality at UC Davis, where he writes, in case you haven't seen yet the YouTube footage of what happened yesterday at UC Davis, here it is. The first minute has the main drama. And you can see the main drama of the main drama in the first minute in this photo. Right. Later, he goes on to write, let's stipulate that there are legitimate questions of how to balance the rights of peaceful protest against other people's right to go about their normal lives, and the rights of institutions to have some control over their property and public spaces. Without knowing the whole background, I'll even assume, for the purpose of argument, that UC Davis's authorities had legitimate reason to clear protesters from an area of campus, and that if protesters wanted to stage a civil disobedience resistance to that effort, they should have been prepared for the consequences of civil disobedience, which is arrest. I can't see any legitimate basis for police action like what is shown here. There. Watch that first minute and think how we'd react if we saw it coming from some riot control unit in China or in Syria. The calm of the officer who walks up and in a leisurely way pepper sprays unarmed and passive people right in the face. We'd think this is what happens when authority is unaccountable and has lost any sense of human connection to a subject population. And he thinks that's what's happened there. Right. Let's go to an open letter to Chancellor Linda P.B. Kate, written by somebody, one of the professors there, that was at the civil disobedience. And I think it's a he, but it's written as though it was a she, has written to express my outrage at the police brutality which occurred against students engaged in peaceful protest on the UC Davis campus today, to hold you accountable for this police brutality and to demand your immediate resignation. He says that she called the police in and so is therefore responsible for what they did. Later in this open letter to, what is she, the boss lady, the Chancellor, the chap writes, on Wednesday, November the 16th, you issued a letter by email to the campus community, referring back. In this letter you discussed a hate crime which occurred at UC Davis on Sunday, November the 13th. In this letter you expressed concern about the safety of our students. You wrote, it is particularly disturbing that such an act of intolerance should occur at a time when the campus community is working to create a safe and inviting space for all our students. That's what she wrote. You write, while these are turbulent economic times, as a campus community, we must all be committed to a safe, welcoming environment that advances our efforts to diversity and excellence at UC Davis. So she's obviously one of these people that just writes this new kind of language that I don't understand. But maybe they do at UC Davis. So that's what she wrote on November the 13th. I will leave it to my colleagues and every reader of this letter to decide what poses a greater threat to a safe and inviting space for all our students, or a safe, welcoming environment. At UC Davis, setting up tents on the quad in solidarity with faculty students brutalized by police at UC Berkeley, or sending in riot police to disperse students with batons, pepper spray and tear gas guns while those students sit peacefully on the ground with their arms linked. Is this what you have in mind when you refer to creating a safe and inviting space? Is this what you have in mind when you express a commitment to a safe and welcoming environment? I'll just throw in here, because I find this all terrifically difficult, that the Chancellor, Linda P.B. Katte, is probably very highly paid to do a very hard job. And there are times when these highly paid people have to really make some very hard decisions and make some really correct decisions and difficult decisions, and that might have involved actually going down and speaking to the protesters as opposed to just picking up the phone and calling in the police. I don't know, but when you're really highly paid to do a really responsible job, sometimes you really have to front up and really do something for your money. Right, in the Atlantic again, a different article by Alex Madrigal on the same subject, Why I Feel Bad for the Pepper Spraying Policeman, Lieutenant John Pike. That's our hero with the pepper spray. A regular guy named John Pike has become the new face of evil among people following the Occupy protests around the country. The UC Davis police officer, matter-of-fact pepper spraying of seated, obviously peaceful students has provoked justifiable outrage. James Fallows, that's the first article in the Atlantic that I read, summed up the situation with his usual precise moral compass. This is what happens when authority is unaccountable and has lost any sense of human connection to a subject population. I don't like the subject population thing, but I know what he's talking about. This is what happens when authority is unaccountable and has lost any sense of human connection to a subject population. So, later in this article, we get structures, as in systems, in the sociological sense, constrain human agency. In other words, individual agency is constrained by the structures in which they find themselves. And for that reason, I see John Pike as a casualty of the system as well. Our police force has enshrined a paradigm of protest policing that turns local cops into paramilitary forces. Let's not pretend that Pike is an independent bad actor. Too many incidents around the country attest to the widespread deployment of these tactics. If we vilify Pike, we let institutions off way too easily. Now, this is why I've gone for this. I think this is a big point. Waving your anger at Pike is a bit of a waste of time. Pike wasn't doing it against the system that he works in. Pike was doing it because that's what he thought the system expected of him. So if you're going to wag your finger, wag it at the system. And he finishes this article thus. While it's easiest to note the incidents of police violence, the protesters' cameras also record what's not in the images. Authorities have long claimed that they were merely battling the black bloc, I could tell you what that is, but you wouldn't be interested probably, of violent anarchists. I'll tell you actually. It was kicked off in the UK by anarchists battling against a thing called the poll tax, and it was quite successful. And it has been used a few times in the United States, not so successfully. But the police say it's these black anarchist types that they're after rooting out, and that's why they've gone to violence. But when you look at all these videos, the bogeyman isn't there. They're just sitting there silently, peacefully protesting. Instead, it's a dozen scared kids and a police officer named John Pike spraying them in the face from 3 feet away. And while it's his finger pulling the trigger, the police system is what put him in the position to be standing in front of those students. I'm sure that he is a man like me, and he didn't become a cop to shoot history majors with pepper spray. But the current policing paradigm requires that students get shot in the eyes with chemical weapons if they resist. however peaceably, someone has to do it, and it was Pike in this case. And while the kids may cough up blood and writhe with pain, what happens to the man who does it is some ways much worse. Poor Pike is also caught up in a system that is destroying him as well. Solidarity, brothers and sisters.